Hello and welcome everybody to the collective, the Thursday Collective. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Jacqueline Schumann. I am joined here by my partners in crime, Paul Gay. Say hello, Paul.
Hello,
Nikos Sotirakopoulos. Say hello, Nikos.
Hi.
And the infamous Mark Pellegrino. Say bonjour, Mark.
Bonjour, Mark.
Now that you
Excellent.
mentioned Mark, I saw an interesting tweet yesterday. So
Ooh.
someone was discussing Lost, and so someone said, "Give me a good reason to start watching Lost," and someone replies to them, "The good reason is that you're lucky enough that you haven't watched it yet, because you're gonna get the immense pleasure of watching it for the first time." So two things. First, now I'm sold of watching Lost. I've never watched it. I only watched one episode at some point. And this is how I feel about Atlas Shrugged. So this has nothing to do with today's episode. I just saw Mark and I remember this very interesting tweet.
No, I feel the same way whenever I give somebody Atlas Shrugged to read for the first time. My adopted daughter, Kiana, read The Fountainhead for the first time. And I think I remember saying, well, I admire you. You're reading this for the first time. I can never do that. And she's going to start Atlas Shrugged soon. I hope she's watching. So,
what did you think of The Fountainhead?
she liked it. She liked it quite a bit. Maybe she'll write in and tell us her opinion.
Excellent. And already with the super chats, Jonathan Honig for $1.99. Thank you, Jonathan, for supporting us. So today, guys, we have an interesting topic to kick it off, which I think, depending on how lengthy our answers are, could be the entire topic, but we'll see. The question that our illustrious producer posed to us was, who is the most successful person in history? And then I want to put his parenthetical in there, vague on purpose, because of course I had a million questions like, according to who, and what's the measure of success, yada, yada, yada. So I'm not going to actually start it off. I'm gonna, because I was chosen to MC this, I'm going to choose who gets to start it off. But I do want to say something real quick. This person would not have been my top choice for the most successful person in history. So this is not my answer. However, I need to do a shout out to Tina Turner, who died yesterday at the age of 83 years old. An amazing, amazing woman, inspiring singer, left her abusive husband, Ike Turner, with nothing more than 36 cents in her pocket and a mobile gas card. Completely remade herself after years of not really making it. And I remember the movie with why am I blanking on it was Lawrence Fishburne was in it. He played Ike Turner, and Angela Bassett played Tina Turner. I remember watching that movie and just being astounded at this woman's life. So in memoriam and rest in peace, Tina Turner.
And I saw her live in concert when she was in her 50s, right at the height of her fame in the late 80s. She was an astounding performer, an amazing singer, amazing energy. And when you do know a little bit about her history, the abusive background she came from, and how she literally got to where she got from nothing, it's a pretty astounding story. But she's not going to be my vote for the most successful person in history. That's a massive. I just found out this time.
Why don't you start it off then, Mark?
All right. So I mean, I'm just bloviating at the moment, because I just found out this topic literally 2 minutes ago. But it occurred to me that I think the most successful person in history would probably be Aristotle. For without Aristotle, we don't have Newton. Without Newton, we don't have the scientific revolution, and we don't have the intellectual movements that followed and gave us the great United States of America. I would also say, and counterpoint to that, the most infamous person, and probably even successful in the sense that his philosophy has even gained more ground and more popularity in the 21st century, would be his teacher, Plato. So to me, those people have influenced the thinking of the world more than any other people. You guys can differ with me. If you do, please tell me why I'm wrong.
So a reason why Aristotle would be a good answer is because to be successful, it also means that you lead a life that you enjoy. And he lived relatively long enough. He died in his 60s. He lived in different areas. He lived in Asia Minor. He lived in Athens. He lived in Macedonia, obviously the Greek, northern Greece, we mean. So he lived a very interesting life. Another thing which would make me give my vote also to Aristotle is that he saw also his students do great things. So Aristotle was a teacher, not only a teacher, but he was also a teacher. And he taught 3 people who led empire. And the most obvious one is Alexander the Great. So successful as a philosopher, obviously, as Andrew Bernstein puts it, usually Aristotle taught us to think. He had a relatively good life, 2 wives, not at the same time. He had children.
I'm not sure if he'd be so happy with Alexander the Great's mass crucifixions, though. That might get on his nerves a bit.
What do you expect, Mark?
Yeah, I don't think he would know that much for all this. So he would just know that, hey, so his take was, we are superior to these people on the East culturally and all that stuff. So we're basically doing them a favor. So rather than me saying who is the most successful, I will say who are not the most successful, because I happen to agree with Mark, so there's nothing more to add here. I wouldn't say as most successful people, the people who held the biggest power in history. I have 2 examples here, Alexander the Great and Stalin. You could say they're perhaps the 2 of the 5 most powerful people in history. And how do they end their lives? So Alexander, while he's at the peak of his glory, he's literally a god. He's adored as a god. He gets basically paranoid. Twice he thinks there's a conspiracy by people who are very close to him, his best friends, and he puts them on the torture rack to, quote, reveal their plans. And then he kills even more people, again, out of paranoia and out of suspicion. So he has to kill his best general, Parmenion. And at some point, he gets offended by a comment that his best friend, one of his best friends, makes, a guy who saved his life, and Alexander murders him. And then when his mind clears up a bit from the alcohol, he realizes the monstrosity that he has done. So Alexander the Great is an example that you might be literally a god among men, and yet you might not be happy if what you did is not something which is, as we would say, stands to reason. And the other example would be Stalin, who also we know for sure 2 things. First, that few people in history had the power that Stalin had. 2, he was adored by half the world. And when we say adored, we mean perhaps levels above the Beatles. So for a communist in the 30s and the 40s and the early 50s, Stalin was a more deified figure than the Beatles were for a 16-year-old girl. And yet Stalin lived in unspeakable unhappiness and misery. He would often say to his guards, I look at you and I wonder, will you be the one who's going to stab me in the back? And also he had in his consciousness that his wife committed suicide because he was unhappy with him. And he would go to her grave and cry. So the most successful man in history, it doesn't matter if you conquest half of the world or the entire world known to the time, you can still not be successful because inside your heart and your mind, you're not happy and you know it.
As a capitalist, I have to say that I'm very happy the man was extremely unhappy for the crimes that he committed in life, the personal crimes he committed to his own integrity. And also as a capitalist, I have to take a break here and make an announcement to our wonderful sponsor here. Are you tired of generic one-size-fits-all fitness plans that don't deliver results, Paul? I know you are.
Yeah.
It's time for a change, my friend. Our sponsor, Thomas Bisson, has created the Pioneers of Personal Progress membership, and it's designed specifically for individuals like you who are committed to self-improvement and rational decision-making, which I think you're great at, Tom. It won't make you taller, but it'll make you stronger. So I say goodbye to cookie cutter workout routines and diets that just don't work for your unique body type and goals and lifestyle. Instead, embrace a principled and evidence-based approach that aligns with objectivist values. Every time I read this, it sounds amazing to me. So when you join the Pioneers of Personal Progress today, you'll get an immediate access to the newly created course, The Science of Building Habits Made Easy. And within the next 30 days, we'll be adding 2 more amazing courses, Principled Strength Training for Life and Evidence-Based Nutrition for Getting in Great Shape. So for a limited time only, Tom is offering an incredible deal for Daily Objective listeners. You can get lifetime access, guys, listen to that, lifetime access to all 3 courses for a one-time fee of just £14.40. So act fast, because once the other 2 courses are added, the price will increase. So don't miss this exclusive offer to transform your relationship with fitness and nutrition. Click the link in the description below and get started with the Pioneers of Personal Progress membership today. Your journey starts right now, and towards your lasting success and a healthier, more fulfilling life begins presently. So, my friend.
Oh, and let me add something to the ad. Some of the most attractively jacked members of the Objectivist community I know have trained with Thomas. So I won't name names, but they're quite strong.
I think we Objectivists need to be jacked. We need to be jacked.
Not jacked, just to clarify.
Well, jacked is good too. I mean, but we need to be jacked and jacked to take care of business. Because we got to take care of business, folks.
Yes, sir. Okay, who's next for most successful person in history? Let's see what Paul has to say.
All right. So first, footnotes to what you guys had to say. I agree that Plato's thoughts are evil and lead only to darkness and despair, as if that's a bad thing. But I want to point out that Plato could write. Most philosophers, and I say this with the I majored in philosophy, so I had the opportunity to read a lot of philosophers. Most philosophers write really, really badly, and Plato wrote really well, at least in my translation. So that is, I have to say, it's in his favor. Even though you don't want bad ideas promulgated well, I appreciate it when they're written in a way that's actually entertaining to read. In terms of Stalin, Nikos, these are fighting words. I'm sorry. The Beatles are less popular than Mr. Stalin. Who wrote back in the USSR? The best recruiting tool ever for that country. So, Stalin can take it. Yeah.
I just want to note though, Joseph Stalin was hot. I mean, he was really like, when I look, you guys got to search up pictures of him in his youth before he got the stash.
Okay, in his youth, he was hot. After the age of 30, not only he was really bad looking, but in the portraits, he looks decent. If you see uncensored videos, first of all, his face is, so he has many things not going on for him in his physical appearance. But his success with women was unquestioned. But this is not what I meant, that he was more popular than the Beatles.
I just needed to put in that female view and derail Paul.
How can we actually, sorry to interrupt, Paul, but now we've gone on to this tack. How can we actually measure his success with women? When you're the dictator of a country, who in the hell is going to turn you down?
Oh, no,
before
he...
I don't want to be bad action.
No, actually, he didn't...
He was a thief and like a thug. So who's going to, he was a tough guy.
All right, it's time to restore some seriousness here. Jax, you have never seen Ringo Starr in bathing trunks, so I don't want to hear about this Stalin guy. Okay, all right. So this is going to take a while. I apologize. So before I defined my terms, I did what most people do, which is just throw names out, because who wants to think about why you're throwing them out? And the first person I thought of was the warriors. I thought of Alexander the Great, first name that I wrote down. I thought of Genghis Khan. Thought of Napoleon. And to me, they're like Bond villains, but with better writing. But Not sure I would choose them for most successful person in history. Then I started thinking of thinkers and leaders who are closer to my side of the fence. And I thought of Washington. Without him, who knows if we would have had a non-imperial presidency? Who knows if the United States would have got off on the right foot? I think of Jefferson, who is probably the most philosophically inclined of the founding fathers. I think of Lincoln, who I have more mixed feelings about now than I did as a kid, but was the best writer among the presidents in history. And I found incredibly moving with an incredible life story. And I thought, these guys are great, but they're no Donald Trump. Now, look at what Trump had to overcome. Trump was a reality show star, which is the lowest form of human life. Now, I was a fan of Celebrity Apprentice, but we can all agree he was the weakest part of that show. And aside from Celebrity Apprentice, the guy had two claims to fame. Number one, he and Vince McMahon take part in a battle of the billionaires at WrestleMania 23, where he shaves Vince's hair off. That's a victory. And he has a cameo as rich kid Waldo's dad in the delightful 1994 version of The Little Rascals. And yet, with these albatrosses around his neck, this guy goes on to become president of the United States. Pretty damn successful. Not choosing him. So I asked my son, who am I going to pick? And he said Stanley Kubrick. And in fact, Kubrick is on my list because in terms of filmmakers, Stanley Kubrick and Woody Allen and Steven Spielberg have three bodies of work that I would sacrifice Jax for. And in terms of financial success and cultural impact, though, you've got somebody like George Lucas who could buy them and sell them. But his work doesn't mean anything to me near to what those other three filmmakers. And then I realized, okay, I got to set up my criteria because I'm just, I'm wasting time. I'm certainly wasting your time right now with this. So I go, what is success? And I think, is it personal happiness? Is it achievement? Is it impact on culture? Is it impact on me? And to those four questions, my answer is yes. So then I think about philosophers. And obviously, Mark starts off with the big guy. He goes with Aristotle, which is the smart bet. And anybody with intelligence here would start with Aristotle. And of course, Mark is smart. So I didn't choose Aristotle. I thought about Rand. And I thought about, in terms of achievement, clearly. In terms of her personal happiness, I'm guessing not as much as I would have hoped for her. In terms of impact on me, enormous. In terms of impact on the culture, it's really a let's see situation because we all want to maximize her impact on the culture. We think it would transform the culture in ways that would be fantastic. But I would like to have seen, frankly, a little bit more, a more objectivist world since 1956 or whenever Atlas was published. I'm troubled that we haven't come farther than we have. So for me, she's a source of clarity and insight and wisdom. But when I think of Rand, I don't think of joy in my life. I think of, she helped me in so many ways intellectually, but I don't think of her as a source of joy, even though, yes, they're linked. So then I realized, okay, so there's one criterion I haven't named, which is who has given me the most joy in my life as an additional criterion to the other four. So I go to my list of heroes in terms of joy. And I've got Mr. Spock from Star Trek. I've got Harold and Maude from Harold and Maude. I've got Kwai Chang Caine from Kung Fu. I've got Hercules, Prometheus, Superman, and they're all heroes, but they have one tiny drawback. They're fictional. So what about writers? I look at Edward Albee, my favorite playwright, who wrote The Zoo Story, the best one-act play ever written, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the second best full-length play ever written. We can all agree. I look at the science fiction writers who meant a lot to me: Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Harlan Ellison, Robert A. Heinlein, Rod Serling, Spider Robinson. These guys are in my pantheon. They changed my life. They made it worth living. I don't think any of them is the most successful person in history. I think about my favorite actor, and right behind Mark, it's Boris Karloff. He was the Frankenstein monster. He was the Mummy. He was the Grinch. Loved him as a kid, love him as an adult. Excellent actor. Probably not the most successful person in history. And then I think about, what about people that I know personally as opposed to people whose work I know? And the one who comes to mind is Bob Jones was my high school creative writing teacher. And we didn't have a creative writing class in high school, but he met me, he knew me, he took a liking to me for some reason, God knows why. And he started a creative writing class in which I was the only student for 3 terms. And over the course of 3 semesters, I turned in over 1,000 poems and lyrics and short stories to him. And he took me seriously enough to read every one of them. So that meant that I had a reader, somebody who wasn't my mom, wasn't my dad. So I kept writing. And obviously that's incredibly important to me, but I can't really name Bob Jones as the most successful person in history. So what does that bring us to? Obviously, you guys are already there. It brings us to Simon and Garfunkel, the Rolling Stones, and Nikos, the Beatles. Okay, so clearly the answer is the Beatles. In terms of achievement, check. It's the greatest body of popular music in history. And also, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, it's the most popular and most financially successful body of music in history. Impact on culture, check. We conquered Britain, the Beatles conquered America, and then the Beatles conquered the world, except for Russia, apparently. Then I think of impact on me, and the answer is they are the greatest source of joy in my life, aside, of course, from my wife and my son. So that's really, really high. But the question wasn't who is the most successful band in history, it's who's the most successful person in history. I love John Lennon, despite his many, many personal flaws and philosophical flaws. I love him. I love Paul McCartney, despite his flaws. So how do I choose? In terms of achievement, both enormous. In terms of impact on the culture, both enormous. In terms of impact on me, my opinion, artistically, they are pretty much equal. But I prefer Paul's character to John's character, and I prefer Paul's optimism and the empathy that he shows in his music. This is a guy who at the age of 15 wrote When I'm 64. This is a guy who wrote Things We Said Today at 22, which is a song looking into the future at a time when he would be looking back at the past. A guy who wrote Yesterday, 23 years old, who could get inside the mind of Eleanor Rigby and Father Mackenzie, who wrote For No one of the most moving breakup songs I've ever heard, who gave us the generous, life-affirming pageant of Penny Lane, who wrote She's Leaving Home, which was a song that bridged both sides of the generation gap at a time when rock music was not supposed to do that. And you were a jerk if you thought that parents ever had a point of view that was worthwhile. When Julian Lennon was 5, his parents divorced, and Paul drives out to Cynthia and Julian's house to offer his support to them. And on the way over, he comes up with a song because Julian is a depressed 5-year-old boy. He's losing his dad. And the song starts, "Hey, Jules, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better." Who does that? So that brings us to personal happiness. John was a troubled soul, and I would say only intermittently was he a happy camper. Paul had, I would argue, every reason to be equally angry and equally bitter in his life. His mom dies of cancer when he's 14 years old. His best friend and songwriting partner breaks up with him and then slags him off in the press for on and off for years, which undermines his credibility for decades. The critics are vicious against his work. Then his best friend is murdered at the age of 40. His beloved wife, Linda, dies of cancer at 56. Another of his best friends, George, whom he regarded as his baby brother and whom he loved and brought into the Beatles, is stabbed repeatedly by an insane intruder in his own home, and he dies 2 years later of cancer at 58. Paul has a horrendous rebound marriage to a gold-digging parasite. Despite all that, this guy chooses to be happy. He's chosen to be happy all of his life. So he was 1/4 of the greatest band in history. He was half of arguably the greatest songwriting partnership in history. When Brian Epstein died, I was their manager, he kept the Beatles going. Without him, there's no Magical Mystery Tour, there's no White Album, there's no Let It Be, there's no Abbey Road. After the breakup, for which he's blamed, he becomes one of the most popular solo artists and one of the most popular solo acts in history. He writes the second best James Bond song ever. He's a brilliant bass player, he's a brilliant singer, he's a brilliant composer, and occasionally he's a good lyricist. He turns 81 next month, he's still writing, he's still touring. He's the richest musician in the world, and more importantly, he's given me more joy than any other Liverpudlian in history. James Paul McCartney is the most successful man who ever lived.
I'm almost
I
sold.
want you to write my eulogy.
Exactly.
Exact same things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll tell you
guys
what,
remind
when
me-
Paul McCartney dies, or whenever I hear him again, that's the first thing I'll think in terms of his life will be this little monologue. I won't remember the details, but it was very impactful.
Thank you.
Yeah, this needs to be a short, right? You guys need to splice that out and tweet it out Hashtag Paul McCartney.
Incidentally, the more Paul, the more you talk, the more I feel like I have in common with you. Beatles have been my favorite band since I was 15 years old. I had every album they ever made, and I'm a horror movie buff, even a classic horror movie buff like you. I would ask you to marry me, but you're already married and I'm already married. We can't go
Susan
there.
may be open to a conversation. We'll talk.
Okay.
Guys, remind me never ever to follow Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to read a few super chats real quick. Mary Aline for $3 sending us a fist bump. Thank you, Mary Aline. Regina for I think that's euros, €2. Hey, you. Thank you. More support. I'm going to read. I will read free trades in just a second because it's going to be on topic. Christopher Smith for $2.99 Canadian. Cool. Thank you. Mary Aline, I think this is in reference to when Nikos was talking about the Beatles. 16, I was 9 or 10 when I freaked out over the Beatles. I cried when my mother wouldn't take me to see them. Aw. Mary Aline for $2. Oh, do I have to read this one? Nice arms, Jax. Thanks, Mary Aline.
That's great.
Okay, so Robert Nazir, thank you, Robert. Paul's arguments for Paul are undeniable. QED and case closed. Okay, so I'm going back to Kiana Pellegrino for $10. Sorry, I'm late to the live. I love the Fountainhead. Rourke is my favorite. Ellsworth can go to hell. Peter is stupid. Dominique, she's okay. Not my favorite, but I get why she is the way she is. Hi, Dad. I think that's to you, Mark.
Probably.
Okay, so so free trade says successful according to what criteria, and that is something sort of that Paul hit on, and I was thinking about that as well. Now, since all the good answers have been taken, I'm going to have to come up with. Well, I have maybe 3 answers. You guys might not like any of them. But when I think about, of course, I went and I looked up who are the most successful people in history. I Googled it, and the criteria is, well, successful in what? In business, in just making money, in popularity, in influence. Alfred Hitchcock, of course, was like one of the ones for directors. George R.R. Martin for authors. I was actually surprised I didn't see Elvis Presley on there for singers. The only 3 singers that they had on there was John Lennon, Michael Jackson, and Madonna. But I actually thought about it in sort of the opposite way. Now, I would love to say Ayn Rand, and the way that Paul defined success in terms of impact on you, I wasn't looking at it that way. I was looking at it in terms of influence. Who has the most influence? And unfortunately, I had to come up with Immanuel Kant because he's done the most evil. He's done, without an Immanuel Kant, you would not have had a Karl Marx, you would not have had an Adolf Hitler, you wouldn't have had a Mao Zedong, you wouldn't have had a Stalin, and I think he was the most successful at spreading evil. But that's not actually my big answer. I think he's the most evil in terms of and the most influential for evil. But when I was actually thinking about this, before I researched anything and looked anything up, 2 names came to mind. The first one is my favorite of all time, who is David Bowie, who I think I feel about David Bowie the way Mark and Paul feel about the Beatles. I have loved him since the age of 13, when I identified with every single one of his albums. He has been a tremendous success in terms of in terms of an artist, period, not just a singer and brilliant musician. He started out as a mime, and he's a great actually painter. He was a great actor. He had amazing he had such tremendous influence on existing rock stars, past and present. So Bowie is going to be my personal choice. But the word that came to my mind, the name that came to my mind when I was just free associating this was Michael Jordan. And I think I never would have cared about basketball if there hadn't have been a Michael Jordan. And I feel like if you go anywhere in the world today and say the name Michael Jordan, there's not a single person who won't know it. And they named a shoe after him. I mean, who gets his own shoe? So that's my answer is Michael Jordan. It's not Mozart, it's not Beethoven, it's not Aristotle, it's Michael Jordan.
Why Jordan out of all the basketball players? What is it that sets him apart from other basketball players in your mind?
He, first of all, I'm not a basketball buff, by the way. So, and this speaks to, how popular and successful. He is I think he is the epitome of an athlete, of persistent, consistent in the face of all kinds of adversity and challenges. He, even though, I mean, he was tall, but he wasn't as tall as some other basketball players. He was, wildly successful financially. I actually just watched Air, and I recommend that everybody watch that movie. It's a great movie. I didn't understand that he was actually the first person, and it was maybe more the negotiation on his mother's side, but who actually in inking a deal with Nike was the first athlete to demand ongoing royalties, which of course, set him up for the rest of his life. I think he is a mentor, a tremendous example to children everywhere. And, be like Mike,
Daniel says,
go ahead.
Daniel says, because he played in Space Jam, but let me add one thing. If Michael Jordan in the early 90s played in a film with Michael Jackson, Madonna, and I don't know who else was, the star would be Michael Jordan. I don't think there's anyone who was so recognizable throughout the world. And also, he changed the fate of basketball and the fate of the NBA. He made it a universal spectacle, and he made it a universal product. So there's a very good case to be made that Michael Jordan is definitely the most successful athlete of all times. Not only the best one, or not necessarily the best one, but definitely the most successful. So Messi, for example, has had tremendous success, but he hasn't had anywhere near the charisma or the impact factor of Michael Jordan. And this comes from a Messi fanboy. Anyway, okay, so
right,
to
we have
gather
two more super chats. I'll get to them real quick. Mary Aline for $2. Thank you. Just a cool. And then Robert Nazier validating me. Thank you, Robert. Bowie, yes, the man lived at least 3 great lives. Absolutely.
Yes,
Bowie was fascinating to me because he was, go on, sorry, Mark.
No, you go.
Bowie interested me because he was such a chameleon. The idea that each album or whatever, he would reinvent himself. And I don't recall somebody in rock and roll doing that before then. They may well have, but he was the first guy I was aware of. And then I know nothing about Madonna aside from the hits that were played on the radio, and I'm not a fan, but I was fascinated by her chameleonic personality, where she would just keep reinventing herself and stay, quote, relevant, unquote, for years and years and years. So that I thought was good.
With her, it's called psychosis.
Okay, all right. I also thought Changes was brilliant, and I thought Space Oddity was a fantastic song. I want to second your support of the movie Air. I have zero interest in basketball. I couldn't pick Jordan out of a lineup. I don't care about sneakers, and Air was really good.
Okay,
and in fact, and Michael Jordan didn't really, or the actor who played Michael Jordan was in it for, like a minute. It was really just the story of creating this legend. So my favorite, I have many favorite Bowie songs, but one that most people will not know and that everybody should now Google is Queen Bitch. Everybody go look up Queen Bitch. Off the Honky Dory album. That's probably, if I had to take an album with me to a desert island, it would probably be Honky Dory.
And Nikos,
so we have plenty.
if you're thinking that it's time to get going, before we go, I have to take a capitalist break. So just let me know when you're ready to call it quits, and I'll sound off one more time.
So before the capitalist grade, let's sum up. So we have as answers for the most successful man in history. We've got Aristotle, we've got Paul McCartney, we've got Michael Jordan, and we've got David Bowie. A lot of food for thought, and also a lot of inspiration for people to maybe go and check more about the Beatles or Bowie. I know I haven't listened to much of David Bowie, so here's an opportunity. So Mike, give us some parting thoughts.
So my parting capitalist thoughts are, if you are tired of generic one-size-all fitness plans that don't deliver results, it is time for a change, guys. Our sponsor, Thomas Bisson, has created Pioneers of Personal Progress membership designed specifically for individuals like you who are committed to self-improvement and rational decision-making. So say goodbye to cookie-cutter workout routines and diets that just don't work for your unique body, goals, and lifestyle. Instead, embrace a principled and evidence-based approach that aligns with objectivist values. So when you join the Pioneers of Personal Progress today, you'll get immediate access to the newly created course, The Science of Building Habits Made Easy. And within the next 30 days, we'll be adding 2 more amazing courses, Principled Strength Training for Life and Evidence-Based Nutrition for Getting in Great Shape. And for a limited time only, folks, Tom is offering an incredible deal for daily objective listeners, okay? You can get a lifetime access to all 3 courses for a one-time fee of just £14.40. That's £14.40, folks. That's about 2 cups of Starbucks, all right?
That's not how much weight we'll lose, though, is it?
Who people
fancy
travel,
Starbucks.
who people travel from the other side of the world to do events in the UK, and yet they tell him, let's meet up at very early in the morning to train. So this guy is in demand because this guy knows what he's doing. So be like the other objectivist, join his programs.
That's true. And if you don't act fast, once the other 2 courses are added, stuff's going to get more expensive, folks. The prices are going to rise. So don't miss this exclusive offer to transform your relationship with fitness and nutrition. Click the link in the description below and get started with the Pioneers of Personal Progress membership today. Your journey towards lasting success and a healthier, more fulfilling life begins now. Why not? And that's all I have to say on the topic.
Excellent.
What is we have one more super chat that just came in from Free Trade SEK. I don't know what monetary that is, but it's 50. So whatever that is. In the spirit of Jax's contribution of Kant, parenthetical criteria being your influence on the world, all suggest Jesus Christ. I was actually thinking of Jesus Christ as well, and Muhammad.
No.
If you die on the cross, that's not very successful.
It would be Paul. I don't mean Paul Gay. It would be Saint Paul, because it was Saint Paul who brought this little teeny rebellious sect of Judaism to the rest of the world. So I would say, if you wanted to pin Christianity on anybody, it wouldn't even be on Jesus. It would be on Paul.
Okay.
Woody Allen said that the best thing he could say about God is that he's an underachiever. Because I thought about God as a potential for most successful. Then I thought, how do you explain mosquitoes? It's troubling to me.
Okay, guys, I missed a super chat. Apologies from Ashley Shrug for $1.99. Jax, I cried so hard when we lost Bowie. One of the, and an emoji of a goat, greatest of all time. Yes, absolutely. I believe it was January 10th. I remember crying that day very hard as well, because it had always been my dream to somehow save David Bowie from hostage so that I would forever be his hero. And I was never able to do that. But maybe in the afterlife, we'll see.
I hate it when life works out that way. Marlon Brando wasn't supposed to die until he worked with me, and he went and croaked.
I wanted to be tied up like Robin and rescued from Catwoman, but that's a different kind of fantasy.
Which Catwoman?
Oh, definitely Julie Newmar. No question, Julie Newmar. Yeah.
I've met her.
Oh, I hate you. That's not fair.
And on that happy note, this eventful Thursday Collective reaches an end. Many thanks to those of you who watched, to the super chatters, and of course to our sponsor Thomas. Many thanks to the panel. That was good fun. Upcoming shows tonight, 10 p.m. UK, Live on Earth with Robert and Amy Nasir. And they will interview Jean Moroni on the concept of happiness. So 2 happy people interviewing someone who is an expert on the topic. This sounds promising. So many thanks from all of us. All the best. See you next week.